Hello, everybody. David Shapiro here. This video was requested by a member of my Patreon community, so thank you for that. And to provide a little bit of context as to the inciting incident, so that you understand kind of where this video is coming from and what my Patreon member was reacting to, was news that Anthropic is developing financial models. So they're basically trying to get into the quant world of Wall Street, which is like kind of a head scratcher. Like, isn't Anthropic supposed to be pro safety? So why are they getting in bed with Wall Street? Isn't this a sign of elite capture? And just to put a cap on that before getting into the presentation, what I will say is that my personal interpretation is that because Anthropic is what I would call safety pilled, meaning that they have hired a bunch of people who are effective altruists and rationalists in the Eliezer Yudkowsky camp. They basically believe that anything in service of aligning AI is morally justified, including selling out to governments, militaries, and Wall Street, because that is still better than AI eradicating everyone. So to them, a cyberpunk dystopian future is still more acceptable, even if that's what they're actively working towards, than Skynet, because they believe that Skynet is inevitable unless they and they alone intervene. So yes, they're as crazy as I'm making them out to be. At least that's my opinion. Now, more to the point, what is actually happening? Because you can put the cart before the horse. You can say, we have this holy mission to save humanity from itself and from Skynet. But what's really happening is what's called elite capture. So let's look at the evidence. And by the way, just not to bury the lead, it's way worse than I thought that it was. All right, so first, the public promise of AI is clashing with the private reality of its capture. The promise, and this is something that I am a big champion of, so I will admit that I am on this side. AI is presented as a democratizing force for universal benefit, a tool for solving humanity's grand challenges, empowering individuals, and creating widespread prosperity. Now, even with elite capture, it can still do that. However, the reality, what we're seeing, is structural concentration, rent seeking, and the consolidation of economic and political power. The technology's trajectory is being shaped by elite priorities. Now, what I just mentioned is that two things can be true at once, but the real question is who benefits the most and who has control over it. So, next up is, if elite capture is happening, what would you actually expect to see? So just in principle, when you look at the history of elite capture and you're saying, okay, what does elite capture actually look like? Number one, control over bottlenecks. And in this case, high fixed costs for training and infrastructure, such as chips, cloud, data centers, energy, are controlled by a few. So, yep, check that box. And this is structural, where just due to the cost of entry, the threshold, the barrier of entry is so high that you're going to have these natural bottlenecks. So that's not the fault of Google. That's not the fault of Microsoft. It's not the fault of Meta. That's just how this industry happens to look. So they don't need to put any extra effort there. Next is vertical integration. So vertical integration says the same firms own the chips, the cloud, the models, and the distribution channels. Well, that's what everyone has been worried about when they see that little cloud circular diagram of NVIDIA and Microsoft and everyone basically all dealing with each other. Now, that's not specifically what vertical integration is. Vertical integration is closer to what XAI is doing, which is they have the data center, they have the training, they have the data, they have all of it. The only thing that they don't have is the chips, but everyone is now rushing to make their own chips as well. Next is stratified access. The best models and features are reserved for high-paying enterprise finance and defense clients. This is one thing that a lot of people are worried about, because even OpenAI has admitted we have better models that we just can't serve because we don't have the infrastructure for it. We don't have the compute capacity. But guess what? There are probably people that do have access, and they're not even allowed to say that they have access because it could be the Department of Defense. That is 100% speculation on my part, so take that with a grain of salt. It's just within the realm of possibility, because guess what? If the CIA or the NSA or the military says, hey, you've got something that's twice as smart, but it's too expensive to run it for us, and we'll pay whatever it requires. And when they keep announcing that they have $200 million contracts with the Department of Defense, or $500 million contracts, they're paying for something. So again, speculation on my part, but that's how history has played out. Next is regulatory and narrative capture. So this is something that has been more obvious for a bit longer, particularly when Sam Altman had basically a revolving door access to Congress. So the largest players play a central role in writing the rules that govern their industry. This has come out a few times, particularly with OpenAI, but increasingly with Anthropic and others. So it has basically just been normalized, where America and Europe and other nations, they don't know how to regulate this thing. So who do they ask? They ask the frontier labs, and the frontier labs say, regulate it like this, because this is what's best for us. That's perverse incentives, but that is exactly what you would expect to see in the case of elite capture. Next is rent-seeking optimization. So AI is primarily deployed for financial arbitrage, targeted advertising, and worker automation. So this is not what it is primarily deployed for yet, but this is what they were really working towards. So financial arbitrage is basically using it to game the markets, targeted advertising. This is what machine learning has been deployed for on Google and on Facebook and so on and so forth. And then worker automation is what's coming up. So basically, when you say rent seeking, what you're creating is the platform economy or the rentier economy, where the owners of the capital are the ones that are gatekeeping, saying, aha, you now need this resource, and without this resource, you're dead in the water. Which, to be fair, a lot of us, even individual creators, without access to these AI tools, we're dead in the water. I'm able to do what a team of 10 would have taken 5 years ago because I have access to numerous high-powered AI tools. So that is rent-seeking optimization, where it's like, hey, you know what? Instead of owning your own picks and shovels, you're going to just rent the picks and shovels from us. I can't afford to run my own super powerful local AIs yet. Next is underpowered public alternatives. Public and commons-based options exist, but are orders of magnitude smaller in scale. So this is where some companies like Stable Diffusion and others are producing open source models. You still need the hardware to run them, but can you name a publicly available free resource that is run either on state-sponsored servers or local community-run servers? They really don't exist. So open source is a potentially viable alternative, but it still requires a lot of hardware that is kind of expensive to run it. And also, the open source stuff lags behind the frontier models by 3 to 6 months, even if they are a little bit more efficient. Now, of course, there's all the Chinese models, such as DeepSeek, that are very close. But again, those are not used nearly as much as these frontier models. So that is what you would expect to see, and that is what we are seeing by and large. So when we look at kind of the infrastructure, like what do the actual numbers show us? The AI stack is structurally dominated by a handful of firms. A small club of labs such as OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and Meta dominates the frontier, tightly coupled to the majority of cloud platforms. So you've got the foundation models running on the cloud compute, and the chips are going into those clouds. So a cloud, for anyone who doesn't know, when we say cloud, it's just a data center. So Meta has data centers, Microsoft has data centers, and the three top cloud providers are AWS, so that's Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. They control already 60 to 65% of the global cloud infrastructure market. Now, the other thing is that TSMC manufactures 90% of the world's CPUs, and NVIDIA controls 85 to 90% of the accelerators. So if you want to build an AI data center, you basically have three options, unless you're going to build your own like XAI is, or if you want to use CPUs, you're buying something essentially from TSMC, and or if you want accelerators, you're buying something from NVIDIA. Now, there are a few other entrants, but when you look at just the numbers, just how skewed these markets are, you might say, well, Dave, isn't this a monopoly? So the thing is, we have antitrust laws, which basically means that businesses are not allowed to do things to enforce a monopoly, but that doesn't, you can't make a natural monopoly illegal. Just because no one has risen to compete with TSMC, that's not the regulator's concern. Just because no one has risen to compete with NVIDIA, that's not the regulator's concern. And in fact, when you take a step back, the market orthodoxy and the economic orthodoxy is that you actually want something like this to happen, because this creates what's called a price signal. So the price signal basically says, hey, NVIDIA is making mad bank on GPUs. Why doesn't someone else get into the game? And so there you have it. That's what the theory is that eventually the market will correct and that there will be competitors. Just as we see that there's three primary competitors for cloud. So AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google. AWS was definitely the first out of the gate, with Microsoft Azure lagging, and then Google, of course, is they're a player, but people don't like Google Cloud quite as much. Anyways, you get the idea. There's a lot of concentration amongst the big players. It takes money to make money, and the more money you have, the more money you can make, and the easier it is for you to win. That's the long story short. Next up is the structural dominance is reinforced by capital and policy. So the power of capital. Big tech, so like the Magnificent Seven, provided 67% of all generative AI startup funding in 2023. So 2/3 of it. This was not coming from independent investors. This was not coming from venture capitalists. This was coming from big tech itself. The phone call is coming from inside the house, meaning that they're going to also capture most of the benefits that come from those startups. Largest firms plan to spend over $300 billion in AI-related spending in 2025 alone. That is huge, $300 billion. So if you look at the Magnificent Seven and other big tech firms, and it's like, okay, well, we're investing $300 billion, which is more than the GDP of most nations on the planet. What hope do you have, even as a small nation, to keep up with that? You don't. You don't have any hope of catching up. And so that is where like it's elite capture by default, just because the price of admission is so darn high. And then, of course, as we already mentioned, the largest firms are the ones that write the rules. So international governance discussions like UK AI Safety Summit, there we go, show limited representation from labor and civil society groups compared to the strong presence of transnational tech corporations. It is a club and you ain't in it, as George Carlin used to say. The loudest signals are the absences. So one of the things that I was looking for in my research is what are the notes not being played? Because it's easy to look at things that exist and things that people are saying and say, aha, here's the evidence. But there's also stuff that you would want to see or that you would expect to see if things were happening responsibly. So number one, and we've already alluded to this, is the absence of public infrastructure at scale. So for instance, the entire proposed 6-year budget of the U.S. public AI resources, the NAIRR, which I didn't even know about until I was doing this research, is less than Meta's GPU budget for a single year. That is a 6-year public good idea. Now, of course, market orthodoxy and neoliberal orthodoxy says the government shouldn't run these things, it should be privatized anyways. So the fact that we're getting any publicly funded AI infrastructure is, at least in America, that's kind of surprising. Number two, the absence of shared governance. We do not see frontier labs with worker or community representatives on governance boards or binding structures where citizens share real decision-making power. They just go to Congress and get whatever they want. Of course, we saw this huge hullabaloo a couple weeks ago when the CFO of OpenAI leaked on accident that they were interested in getting government backstops to basically shore up their investments. And of course, they had to backpedal, but every time they backpedaled, they basically made it worse until they just stopped talking about it, because the only thing that was going to make it better was to stop talking about it. And so if you weren't aware of this saga, basically the CFO implied that it would be really good if the government could give them guarantees on their investments, meaning that they're taking out these huge hundreds of billions of dollars worth of obligations. And that's a lot of investment and a lot of risk, and it might not pay off. And so what they wanted, hypothetically, was a government guarantee to say, okay, we'll absorb some of your loss. And of course, this is what people call as socialized risk and privatized gain. And so we're not seeing that. We're not seeing ordinary people who represent taxpayers, who represent citizens, involved in making those decisions, except the Congress, who is supposed to be operating on our behalf, but they're very much gung-ho on business, full throttle, accelerate, accelerate, accelerate. Now, I'm on the side of acceleration, but that doesn't mean that it's perfect. We have to look at the ugly side of acceleration too. Next is the absence of public good hero projects. So this is pretty similar to number one, but when we look at Colossus and we look at, what the heck's the name of the one that Meta is doing? It was like Optimus or something. So anyways, the point is that, Meta is building a data center the size of Lower Manhattan, and XAI is building, data centers with hundreds of thousands of GPUs. We're not seeing anything actually like the Apollo program or anything actually like the Manhattan Project that's actually being funded by public dollars to say, hey, actually, we're going to make sure that this is a public good thing. No, everything is for profit, everything is private. So again, that is in accordance with current market orthodoxy. It is in accordance with neoliberal orthodoxy. So that's not to be surprising. But when you look at the costs involved, the cost to entry and the cost to win is so high that the only way that we could collectively win if we wanted a public good thing is to use tax money to do so. But that's just not happening. Now, so that was all at the very high levels. So that is kind of the big strokes. But what are some other examples like Anthropic making those finance models so that the quants can just trade better and have even more information asymmetry than individual investors do? So case file. In case number 1, housing, AI is deployed as a tool for landlord coordination. So in this example, RealPage's pricing AI. An algorithm that uses non-public competitor data, so non-public means that it is not something that you have access to as you or me. It uses competitor data to recommend synchronized rent hikes, which the U.S. Department of Justice accused of facilitating illegal price coordination. So price coordination, if you're not familiar, is a business practice that is illegal, which basically says, what if all the competitors in a particular market talk to each other and agree to all raise prices together, meaning that that is anti-competitive, because then it is against consumer interests, because what the free market is supposed to do is actually lower prices through competition. There was a case, probably about 10 years ago now, where a bunch of monitor manufacturers, so like computer screen manufacturers, all price coordinated. And it was a big deal if you were in the IT space, because your company has to pay for monitors, and so we got news, blah blah blah. Dell and Samsung and everyone was fixing prices of monitors. Another example is SafeRent's Tenant Score, an opaque AI scoring system that automatically rejected a housing voucher applicant. So this actually went to a lawsuit, Mary Louise, based on a black box number, leading to a Fair Housing Act lawsuit. So these are just a couple of examples of where, and this is not even generative AI, by the way. Landlords gain a shared AI brain for rent extraction. Tenants face automated, unaccountable denials from systems they cannot see or contest. This is also very similar to what happened with United Healthcare, which is why, people were angry at United Healthcare. Next up, case file number 2. In the workplace, AI is deployed for surveillance and replacement. And this is where it gets really dystopian. I wasn't aware of this. So Amazon's time-off task system. An algorithmic manager that tracks every minute of a worker's time, flagging idle periods and triggering automated disciplinary action, described as an electronic whip. You cannot get much more dystopian than that. The droid is watching you, and if you're not working nose to the grindstone, it will automatically trigger disciplinary action. Next up is Workday's AI hiring tools, automated resume screening tools. There we go. Sorry. Alleged in lawsuits to systematically discriminate against applicants based on age, race, and disability. Now, we've seen plenty of tools like this happen where more often than not, it's just paying attention to the training data. So this is an example of garbage in, garbage out, where it looks at the past hiring decisions, and the ageism, sexism, or racism, or whatever other biases of past hiring managers gets replicated and amplified by the AI hiring tools. Next is AI-justified layoffs. UPS explicitly cited machine learning for its ability to cut 20,000 jobs. Klarna boasted its AI assistant does the work of 700 support staff. So again, this is what I talk about with post-labor economics. Even if AI doesn't destroy all jobs, what it is doing is undermining worker power. It's undermining labor's authority over itself. So AI is being used to not only put pressure on consumers, it's being used to put pressure on workers. These are all examples of elite capture, because the technology is helping the elites make more money and protect the money that they do have, rather than helping everyone else. Case file number 3. In finance, AI is creating stratified access to alpha. So this goes back to the Claude for financial services. So this was the instigating incident of this entire video and this entire research. An enterprise platform explicitly architected for banking and investment workflows with integrations into proprietary data sources like S&P Capital IQ, PitchBook, and Morningstar. So this again is we might, at first glance, it might be like, why the heck is Anthropic getting in bed with Wall Street? Well, number one, Wall Street has the money. And if you want to build a big company, you need money. And if you believe that you are God's chosen, preordained to save the world from Skynet, then you know what? Taking money from anyone is morally justified. And going towards elite capture and a cyberpunk dystopian future, still justified because that's, according to them, better than the inevitability of Skynet. Hedge fund LLMs. Custom models trained on alternative data such as satellite imagery, sentiment analysis, and so on to generate trading signals and spot patterns humans would miss. Again, it takes a lot of money to do these kinds of things. And this quotation, I don't know where this quotation came from, so take it with a grain of salt. It might just be a distillation. Unlike the consumer version of Claude that millions use, this enterprise platform is architected specifically for finance. This creates a superior cognitive infrastructure for generating returns only accessible to elite capital. Again, it takes money to make money. Next up, case file number 4. For the state, frontier AI is tightly integrated tool of national security. The DoD has awarded contracts worth up to $200 million each to Anthropic, Google, OpenAI, and xAI. These contracts are for developing advanced AI tools for national security missions, fine-tuning models on DoD data, and accelerating AI adoption across the defense enterprise. Now, this is not something that I am particularly concerned about. This is why entities like DARPA exist. Is the military always wants to have the latest and greatest and kind of be ahead of the curve. Now, when generative AI was first up and coming back in the days of GPT-3, I actually consulted with some former military guys who had turned from military officers to outside vendors and contractors. And what they told me at the time was that the entire Department of Defense had no infrastructure for running AI. All of their high performance compute was a decade old. So when you say like, all right, you have an option. You can live in a nation where the military is not investing in AI and is not even aware of generative AI, or you can live in a nation where the military is aware of generative AI and can afford to invest in it. Which nation would you rather live in? I would rather live in the nation that can invest in this stuff. However, the point is it's the same few players that are benefiting. So they are now joining the military industrial complex. So on the one hand, from the perspective of homeland defense and national security, it's good that our Department of Defense is investing in AI. But when you look at who is winning, who is actually getting those military industrial complex dollars, it's the same people that are also helping Wall Street to capture even more rents from the stock market. So, as frontier AI becomes a military and security asset tightly integrated with a few governments and vendors, decisions are made by a narrow circle of security elites with little democratic input. That is the problem. So the pattern is very consistent across many dimensions of the economy already. Landlord is given more power than the tenant via rent extraction. The employer is given more power than the worker via labor control and surveillance capitalism. The institutional investors are given more power than the retail investors due to information asymmetry and being directly and deliberately aided by companies like Anthropic. And the state itself is given more power than the citizens with the security and military industrial complex consolidation. Elite capture is way worse than I realized, and it is moving faster than I would have guessed. So history shows that the benefits of technology are a function of power, not destiny. Key insight here. Who benefits from a new technology is not automatic. It depends on power and institutions. Now, this is from Acemoglu and Johnson. Now, Acemoglu is one of the guys who worked on that book that earned them a Nobel Prize, Why Nations Fail. So for an example, in ancient history, the railroads and telegraph initially created massive fortunes and monopolies before antitrust and regulation diffused benefits. It took many years. The platform era. So I've talked about platform capitalism. It started open and decentralized before reconnecting control into a handful of massive platforms that mediate commerce and communication. This is the centralization and consolidation that we've seen on the internet. Google, YouTube, Facebook, all of those big websites control most of the internet traffic. The current trajectory right now, AI looks much closer to the railroads plus finance plus platform patterns than the open internet. Now, will that change eventually? Maybe, if we get small enough open source models and powerful enough GPUs and CPUs to run them locally. Maybe, but there's also still going to be major informational advantages, information asymmetries, that even having your own local open source AI will not fix, does not touch that. So the question is not, will elites capture AI? The question is whether we will build the countervailing institutions fast enough, public compute, robust antitrust, democratic governance, and worker power to loosen that capture over time. This is why I'm working on post-labor economics, and fully half of the post-labor economics framework is about rebalancing power. I actually have a lot more ideas than just these. So with all that being said, thanks for listening and watching, and I hope you got a lot out of this. As dire as all this sounds, I still do believe that technology is a rising tide that raises all boats. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean it's going to be smooth sailing. And as we often like to say, it takes money to make money, and power begets more power, which is exactly what we're seeing. So with all that being said, cheers, have a good one, and sorry to be the bearer of bad news.